Welcome to the Black Anarchist Podcast, a channel where critical thinkers come to learn and grow. Through pedagogical discussions, we challenge the status quo, conventional narratives, and present raw truth. I'm JC, author of Blame It on Address, the manufacturing of Black homophobia and performative masculinity. Today, we're going to discuss how creating a Black state is the first step towards getting reparations. Now, my last live stream was taken down because it had some copyrighted material in there. So I did upload it today. I just only have the audio. So if you guys didn't catch the last one, you can go back and listen to that. Um, what I'm going to talk about today is how having a Black state is the path towards getting us reparations. Um, for decades, Black Americans have demanded reparations for slavery, Jim Crow, and ongoing systemic oppression. Politicians make promises during election seasons, committees are formed, studies are commissioned, and nothing happens. Why? Because we're asking the oppressive system to pay for oppressing us while we remain under their political and economic control. This fundamentally understands how reparations actually work in American politics and law. And I told y'all how it works under the social contract that reparations are actually paid to a sovereign. They're not paid to individuals. This is the reason why Native Americans get reparations. It's the reason why Israel gets reparations. And I'm not going to do it today, but I am going to come back. I promised y'all I was going to explain how the state of Israel, or the reason why the state of Israel was created. It was not supposed to be a Jewish state. That's a smokescreen for the real purpose of this creation of the state of Israel. It was really created um, as a hub to siphon wealth from other countries. Um, Somebody predicted this long before the creation of Israel. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but I'm going to do that in a separate video. That's not a so. Individual African Americans asking for the federal government to pay reparations, right? They have no enforcement mechanism. They have no political power to compel action, and even when those people from Tulsa, Oklahoma, sued for reparations. I mean, I didn't read the case, but I'm assuming it was dismissed based on sovereign immunity. Um, and having a black state completely circumvents that entire framework that they have concocted to deprive us of access to the courts. They always use sovereignty or lack of standing. Well, if you have a black state, then you have a sovereign has standing, and a sovereign, there is no sovereign immunity against the state. Um, we can protest, vote, petition, but we can't enforce the same government. I mean, we can't force the same government that oppresses us to voluntarily compensate us while we remain under their control as subjects. But here's an even more fundamental legal reason why individual reparations will never work. The nature of sovereignty and property rights under the social contract, according to basic principles of political theory and constitutional law, the sovereign is the ultimate master of all private property within its territory. Individual rights exist only because the sovereign allows them to exist and protects them through law enforcement and courts. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You don't actually have property rights. What you have is a right to exclude. Your rights are basically privileges that are given to you by the state. The state is the true master of all property rights. So that's the reason why I explained I can't sue the government for destroying my property without their consent. The state has to actually consent to it. As a sovereign, you can absolutely do that. I'm going to explain that in greater detail. This means that when individuals sue the government for reparations, they're essentially asking their property master to give them some of the property that the sovereign already controls. The sovereign can simply say no, and there is no higher authority to appeal to. Individual property claims against the sovereign are limited by sovereign immunity, the legal doctrine that protects governments from lawsuits by their own citizens. Which is, I told y'all, that's not what the 11th Amendment actually says. What it actually says is that the state is immune from lawsuits against citizens from another state. So under the 11th Amendment, you can actually sue your own state. This is not based on the 11th Amendment. This is based on a doctrine that was created by the Supreme Court based on common law. And that common law was based on a period in English history where they were controlled by the monarch. So the monarch was sovereign because the monarch was theoretically put in power by God. I'm not sure why they would be going back to English common law to apply sovereign immunity to citizens of your own state. Um, I don't know why No King's Day did not include the judiciary. These philosopher kings who sit on the court completely oppressing us. You can focus on Donald Trump all you want. I want y'all to understand, which is I'm not going to go into detail about it, but we have a system of judicial supremacy. The courts have far more power than the president. It's almost as if Donald Trump got his power from the Supreme Court. So you can look at Donald Trump and protest him all you want. He got his power from the damn Supreme Court. The Supreme Court gave him the green light to do everything that he's doing right now. Now let me stick to this outline and not go off on a tangent. When individuals sue the state or federal government, they face the barrier of sovereign immunity. This legal doctrine holds that governments cannot be sued by their own citizens without the government's consent. Even when governments waive sovereign immunity and allow themselves to be sued, they maintain significant advantages. They control the courts where the cases are heard. Not always, because you can sue in federal court, but even when you sue in federal court, they still defer to whatever the state says. So federal courts are even more reluctant to protect you than the state. I mean, I'm not sure which one is worse, but I'm going to say specifically in the Fifth Circuit, which is where I live. No, they're completely conservative. You're not going to find anybody who's not going to be a pro-hard 10th Amendment advocate. And even the way they're interpreting the 10th Amendment is completely incorrect. States don't have rights, states have duties. And the part that they disregard is the fact that it says that it's not only the states, it's also the people. So power not given to the federal government is retained by the states and its people. But they disregard that second part. They control the law enforcement that would enforce any judgments. They control the treasury from which the payments would come. They can change the laws to limit their liability. They can claim immunity or discretionary government functions. This is why individual lawsuits against the government for reparations have consistently failed. The government is essentially being asked to judge itself, enforce judgments against itself, and pay itself money that it already controls. I want you to understand that even if the government were to give you reparations, it would essentially be paying itself, because even if it gives you money, the sovereign is the master of all private property. So without sovereignty, it really is not going to do anything to meaningfully change the system. You need to have sovereignty for yourself before you get the cash reparations. Then you have some protection, and it does not go back to the same oppressive system that caused you to seek sovereignty in the first, or caused you to seek reparations in the first place. The sovereign immunity doctrine ensures that individuals remain in a fundamental powerless position when seeking compensation from their own government. But what happens when a sovereign sues another sovereign? This is the caveat, that this is the loophole where you get to get around sovereign immunity. When sovereigns sue other sovereigns, the legal framework is completely different. Under the doctrine of sovereign equality, one sovereign cannot claim immunity against another sovereign's legitimate claims. When state A sues state B, or when a state sues the federal government, they're operating as legal equals with equal standing under the law. Let me go back and make sure that y'all can hear me, because I don't want to keep going. It seems like y'all can hear me, so I'm not going to stop. So when you have control over a state, you are sovereign. You can sue the federal government, and you can sue other states. They can't get around it and use a procedural barrier to keep you out of their courts. They have to actually address the merits of your claims. They get around these claims most of the time through procedural mechanisms, not through merit-based arguments. One sovereign sues another, there are neutral forums like the Supreme Court and interstate disputes. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say, is that when a state sues another state, or even the federal government, it goes directly to the Supreme Court. It's not addressed in lower court, so it completely changes the game. It changes the game entirely. Neither party can simply claim immunity or refuse to address your arguments. This brings us to the fundamental issue with individual reparations. Under the social contract, the sovereign must receive reparations first, then distribute them to individuals with its territory. That's how reparations work. I'm not sure if y'all are aware of this. The reparations go to the sovereign, and then the sovereign has to distribute them to its subjects. Individual citizens cannot receive reparations directly from a foreign government or even from their own government without the sovereign's involvement in a transaction. When Germany paid Holocaust victims reparations, the payments went to the state of Israel first. Then Israel's government distributed resources to Holocaust survivors and their descendants according to Israeli law and policy. Individual survivors couldn't negotiate directly with Germany because they lacked sovereign standing to make such claims. Similarly, when Native American tribes receive reparation settlements, the payments go to tribal governments first. Then the tribal government distributes benefits to tribal members according to tribal law and policy. Individual Native Americans cannot negotiate reparations directly with the federal government. They must work through their tribal governments. This isn't a matter of practical convenience. It is a fundamental requirement of legal and political system. Reparations are compensation for wrongs committed against people, not just individuals. The sovereign represents the people as a collective entity, and it has the legal authority to negotiate on behalf of all members of that collective. You can't just have a class action lawsuit. You can't do that. It has to be on behalf of everyone, even those who are not a part of the class. I mean, those who did not, you know, I don't know if y'all know how class action lawsuits, but I guess you have to have like 50 members of the class to certify the class, and then other people can opt in. Class action lawsuits are complete bullshit. Which the way that y'all are trying to do it, you would have to do a class action lawsuit, and the way it actually turns out is that the members of the class, they don't get shit. At most, you might get $100. I'm being I don't know, maybe I'm being conservative with the number, but you're going to get a nominal amount. The largest share of it is going to go to the attorneys. They're going to take the money. So class action lawsuits are complete bullshit because the money goes to the attorneys, not to the members of the class. This way, the money goes directly to the state, which is going to be a black state, and then it gets trickled down to the citizens. It's not going to be siphoned by the parasitical attorneys. I'm going to do more content talking about these parasites. I think attorneys are the scum of the earth, but you get to bypass the attorneys altogether because the person, well, I'm going to explain later how it works out, how you would get reparations. You can do it. I guess a lawsuit would be one way to do it, but there's other avenues for getting reparations, which does not require the courts to even recognize reparations. You can get it directly through the system that already exists. So this legal framework explains why individual Black Americans cannot successfully obtain meaningful reparations. We lack the sovereign political entity necessary to negotiate, receive, and distribute reparations on our behalf. The federal government cannot pay reparations to Black individuals directly because there is no sovereign Black entity to negotiate the terms, receive the payment, and assure proper distribution. Individual payments cannot be, I want y'all to understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that reparations are charity. I'm talking about the way that they're framing it right now. The way the system would look at it, the way everybody will look at it, is that it is charity. They're going to say it's a handout because it wouldn't be a sovereign to sovereign negotiation that defines true reparations. I'm trying to, y'all don't understand how deep the roots of statism run, that they don't respect individuals. This is what I'm trying to tell you. When socialists only focus on capitalism, they don't actually address the statism piece, they are missing a crucial component of this hierarchy. The sovereign, the state as the sovereign has the ultimate authority. So anybody with any legal, understanding of how the system works is going to say that paying reparations to individuals directly is charity. No, if you pay reparations to a black state, that is an entirely different conversation. The state is legitimate. You, as an individual, are not legitimate, right? Because you can't, it becomes an arbitrary conversation of who's a real descendant of slaves and who's a real black American. And then they're going to get into all these side arguments about whether it is legitimate or illegitimate. Having a black state completely sidestep the entire debate. Because I want y'all to understand that that same argument applies to the state of Israel, right? A lot of those, I don't, I mean, what it is. A lot of those Jews in Israel are not blooded Jews. They're not necessarily indigenous to this, to that region. A lot of them don't have any blood ties to that region whatsoever. Maybe they have some trace of it. If you're Ashkenazi, I don't want to be offensive. It is what it is. If you're Ashkenazi, you're almost purely European. You're not indigenous to that area. It is what it is. I don't give a shit who's gets offended by that. So the whole argument about who's actually a descendant of slaves, who's not, who's really black, it doesn't matter. The reparations go to that political sovereign, and then the sovereign gets to decide who gets it and who doesn't. But that is the first step. You get the money first, and then you decide how it gets distributed. Even if you're not a real black person, even if you're not a real Jew, it's the sovereign who gets to decide. So this is the first step. Those other arguments about who should get it and who shouldn't get it, those are issues that need to be ferreted out later. But the first step is to get the money. A state government has a legal standing to negotiate with the federal government as an equal without facing sovereign immunity barriers that block individual lawsuits. A state government has the constitutional authority to receive, hold, and distribute property on behalf of its citizens, creating the legal framework necessary for reparations transactions. A state government has the political and legal power to enforce reparations agreements, ensuring that payments are made and properly distributed. A state government represents all Black citizens within its territory as a collective entity, providing the unified voice for reparations negotiations. A state government has the legal authority to establish criteria for reparations distribution and to ensure that payments reach the intended beneficiaries according to established legal procedures. But there's a different model that has worked in America. Political entities that control territory, population, and resources have successfully obtained reparations from the federal government. The key difference is political power and leverage, not international sovereignty. Native American tribes provide the most relevant model for how reparations actually work within the American system. Tribes are not fully sovereign nations. When I say fully sovereign, what I mean is they're not sovereign from an international perspective. Native Americans are considered domestic dependent nations, right? They're nations within a nation, just as states are. States don't have sovereignty on a national level, but they're sovereign within the United States. So it's a federalist system. And so I think the Native American model represents the most relevant comparison. Their political status has enabled tribes to successfully negotiate substantial reparations over the past century. The Indian Claims Commission, established in 1946, awarded over $800 million to tribes for historical land seizures and treaty violations. More recently, the 2009 Cabell settlement provided $3.4 billion to resolve claims related to federal mismanagement of native trust lands. The 2010 Tribal Settlement Act provided almost $1.4 billion to resolve water rights and other claims. These weren't charity payments. They were negotiated settlements between the federal government and tribal governments that had the political standing, legal resources, and territorial control necessary to compel serious negotiations. Individual Native Americans could never have achieved these results, but tribal governments with political control over territory and population could. While Black Americans may not be able to achieve the same domestic dependent nation status as tribes, we can achieve something equally powerful. Political control over state governments. States within the American system have significant powers that enable them to pursue reparations in ways that individuals cannot. States can pass comprehensive reparations laws funded by state resources. California is currently pursuing a 800 billion reparations program for Black residents. This is possible because California's legislature has the political will and legal authority to allocate state resources for reparations. A Black controlled state legislature would have even stronger motivation and political support for comprehensive reparations programs. And I want you to understand that even if you control the state, there would be an incentive for other states to pay into your state. So just like the state of Israel, that are all these other nation states are paying reparations to Israel, right? So the same thing would happen if you control the state. All these other states would be incentivized to pay reparations to your state on behalf of their Black residents. So it's the first step. Um, while states can't make treaties, they can regularly negotiate with the federal government over funding programs and policies. States receive hundreds of billions in federal funding annually for education, healthcare, and infrastructure. A Black controlled state would have enormous leverage in these negotiations, able to demand federal reparations programs as a condition for cooperation on federal initiatives. States can sue the federal government and have done so successfully thousands of times. States have legal standing that individuals lack. They can challenge federal policies, demand compensation for federal actions, and pursue remedies through the courts. A Black controlled state will have the legal resources and standing necessary to pursue reparations through litigation in ways individual plaintiffs cannot. States control significant economic resources and can exert substantial political pressure on the federal government. They can refuse to cooperate with federal programs, implement policies that create national political pressure, and use their congressional delegates to advance reparations legislation. A Black controlled state would have economic and political tools to ensure the federal government um, to pressure the federal government in ways that individual activists cannot. Reparations achieved through state level political control would be more comprehensive and sustainable than anything possible through individual demands. A state controlled state could establish comprehensive reparation programs funded by state resources, direct payments, educational grants, business development loans, healthcare programs, and housing assistance specifically for descendants of enslaved people. States spend billions annually on construction, technology, professional services, and supplies. A Black controlled state could implement aggressive minority. I'm not even going to say minority because at that point we wouldn't even be a minority. We would actually be a majority. I guess collectively, if you look at Blacks in the aggregate, we would still be a minority. But for the purposes of this one state, we would not be a minority. So I'm just going to say Black. Black business purposes. Oh no, not Black, not Black. ADOS, American Descendants of Slaves, we would get a preference that directs spending towards ADOS on companies creating substantial wealth building opportunities, state controlled public education system, and can establish curricular funding priorities and programs that address the educational legacy of slavery and discrimination. A Black controlled state could create educational reparations and programs that provide free higher education, trade training, and professional development specifically to ADOS residents. And I want y'all to understand that I'm purposefully saying ADOS as opposed to FBA. Y'all know that whole debacle where Tariq Nasheed basically hijacked ADOS. So I'm not even going to recognize FBA as being a legitimate term. ADOS, specifically, we are descendants of slaves. States own significant land and property that could be transferred to Black ownership as reparations. They control zoning, development, and housing policies that could be used to address historical exclusion from property ownership. States control criminal justice systems and can implement reforms that address the school to prison pipeline, police brutality, and discriminatory sentencing, essentially using state power to provide reparations through justice system reforms. Most importantly, a Black controlled state would have the political leverage necessary to pressure the federal government for a nationwide reparations program. States can refuse federal cooperations, file federal lawsuits, and use their congressional delegates to advance reparations legislation in ways that individual activists cannot. States have successfully used their political power to force federal legislation changes many times throughout American history. Excuse me, y'all. Let me just give some examples. The civil rights during the civil rights era. Southern states' resistance to federal rights laws ultimately forced federal intervention and stronger enforcement mechanism. If state resistance can force federal action, state cooperation can be leveraged to demand federal concessions. Environmental policy, states like California have used their economic and political power to force federal environmental changes, often by implementing state level programs that create national pressure for federal action. I want y'all to understand that states are laboratory. They're the way America was founded. The whole discussion was that states were going to be laboratories of democracy. So um, this whole conversation about reparations has this sort of ominous mystique around it that they think that it's going to open Pandora's box, that it's going to be the destruction of civilized society. Um, you have a model like this whole black state project, which I am proposing, then you can alleviate their fear, right? It's really paranoia, hysteria, that they think is going to completely dismantle their entire system. Um, no, this is going to prove to them that it's not going to be as subversive as they think. That it's actually going to be a stabilizing force. That it's actually going to alleviate all the crime that they are so afraid of. It's going to generate prosperity, not just for blacks. It's going to be prosperous for everybody. It's going to be prosperous for the surrounding states. It's going to be prosperous for um, the counties, even within their own states that have black residents. Everybody's going to benefit from this, but you need to have a model to actually show it. Um, you can't really negotiate from a position of a minority. You have to negotiate as a majority black state. Show them that this can actually work and it's actually going to benefit them as well. Talking about it is not going to get you anywhere because they don't see it. What they see is it's a threat to their um, political power, that it's a threat to their livelihood. Um, no, you establish trade, you establish you're going to eliminate the criminal element, because we're going to engage in creative ways to solve the criminal justice problem. There's not going to be a prison to school pipeline. You're not going to create a culture of degenerates, which is what they say, right? We're going to be in control of our own destination. We're going to create the type of culture that we think is going to be in our rational self-interest. And we're going to have creative ways of responding to the criminal element, right? I'm going to say we need to expel the criminals, those who are not going to be useful towards this project. There's going to be, I want you to understand that this is not just about a criminal justice approach that you're just going to throw people in cages. No, there's going to be a social element behind this too. I want y'all to understand that when Black Wall Street was founded, there was a lot of pride in their communities because they built it themselves. So it's not just political; it's also social. That I want y'all to understand. There's a lot of power in shunning, right? There is no shunning right now because we don't have our own communities that we actually control. But when you have something that is prosperous and then you have these troublemakers coming in, Yeah, you can expel them, but also there's a lot of power in shunning. That you're going to be shamed, you're going to be ostracized. Nobody's going to want to have sex with you. Nobody's going to talk to you. Nobody's going to be your damn friend because you are a damn troublemaker. We don't want you in our community. Get the fuck out. Go to one of these other states and go wreak havoc over there. You're not going to create problems in our state. Let's talk about the McCabe project, which I've talked about in the last live stream. The McCabe's pro the McCabe's projects focus on achieving black political control. Um, that was that was about Oklahoma, but I'm proposing that we do it in Mississippi instead. It provides the most realistic path to reparations because it would create the political leverage necessary to make demands that cannot be ignored. Mississippi receives over 20 billion annually in federal funding, more per capita than almost any other state. A black controlled Mississippi government could threaten to disrupt federal programs, challenge political policies in court, and use the state's congressional delegation to advance reparations legislation. The federal government would be forced to negotiate seriously with a black controlled state government in ways that could never negotiate with individual activists. Mississippi also controls significant state resources that could fund reparations programs. The state budget exceeds 20 billion annually, providing substantial resources for reparations programs even before any federal negotiations. Most importantly, a state-controlled Mississippi would demonstrate black political competence and create a model for other states with significant black population. This is what I'm trying to tell you. This is going to be a laboratory of democracy. We're going to show them that this is possible and we can actually pull this off. We're going to get rid of all of the traitors. We're going to get rid of the APEC lobby. We can create legislation that actually prevents those people from even taking office. Success in Mississippi could lead to similar political takeovers in other states, multiplying the political pressure for federal reparations. The key difference between individual reparations demands and state level reparations is enforcement power. Individual African Americans can ask, petition, and protest, but we can't compel action because we lack political power. A black controlled state government would have multiple enforcement mechanisms. Economic disruption states can disrupt federal programs, refuse cooperations with federal agencies, and create economic pressure that forces federal attention and response. State governments have legal standing and resources that enable sustained litigation against the federal government. They can pursue reparations claims through the courts with far greater resources and legal authority than individual plaintiffs. States control congressional delegations, electoral votes, and political resources that can be used to advance reparations legislation and political politicians. A state government pursuing reparations creates national media attention and political pressure that individual demands cannot generate. Federal politicians would be forced to respond to state level reparations initiatives in ways that they can ignore when they are made by individual activists. States can build coalitions with other states, building multi state pressure for federal reparations programs that would be impossible for individual activists to organize. Federal politicians can ignore individual Black Americans demanding reparations because we lack the political power to threaten their careers or interests. But they cannot ignore state governments that control territory, population, resources, and political power. A Black controlled state pursuing reparations would create several pressures that federal government or several federal politicians could not ignore. Um, Let me get into the timeline. The path from state level political pressure to reparations would follow a realistic timeline. I want y'all to know this is completely pragmatic. Um, First, implement the McCabe Project to gain Black political control over Mississippi state government through democratic migration and voter mobilization. Second, use state resources and authority to establish comprehensive reparations programs for Black Mississippi residents, demonstrating the practical benefits of Black political control. Um, it's not going to be just for the benefit of the Black Mississippi residents. There's also going to be incentives for descendants of slaves to migrate to the state of Mississippi. So then we would not only have a Black majority, we would have a Black supermajority. They're going to have tax incentives. They're going to have education incentives. They're going to have all these incentives to come to Mississippi, and they're going to come in droves for opportunities. All the economic disparities that are going on in other states. They want to get rid of DEI. Okay, you can get rid of DEI at the federal level in other states, but we're going to have DEI in our state, and there's nothing you can do about it because we're sovereign. We're going to throw the middle finger up you. We're the sovereign, and y'all have already created this framework where y'all say anything the sovereign does is right. The sovereign has the final say on all things. There's nothing you can do about it. We have sovereignty in our own state, and it's not based on race. It's based on your status as a descendant of slaves. So there is no way that you can actually disrupt what we're trying to do. And the reason why the McCabe project fell before is because they didn't have sovereignty. I guess they were trying to build sovereignty, but building Black Wall Street wasn't enough because they didn't have any. I guess they probably should have had a militia to protect Black Wall Street, but they didn't do that. So they didn't really have a defense system. So that was really their downfall. But we're going to have a defense system here. So they're not going to be able to come and just bomb us and loot and burn buildings. That's not going to happen this time. Use state political leverage to pressure the federal government for a nationwide reparations program, threatening non-cooperation with federal programs and using the state's congressional delegate to advance reparations legislation. If federal negotiations fail, use the state's legal authority to pursue reparations claim through federal litigation with the resources and standing that individual citizens lack. So if the federal government won't play, then we'll just do it through the courts. And the difference is that you can petition the U.S. Supreme Court directly. You don't have to go through the district courts, Court of Appeals. No, you bypass the entire system. You go straight to the Supreme Court. There is no sovereign immunity defense. They have to address the merits of your claim, and they're going to have a hard time addressing that. They're not going to be able to argue that it's charity because you have a sovereign nation that is created for the purpose of protecting the American descendants of slaves. There is no loophole. They actually have to address it. Use Mississippi's success to inspire similar movements in other states with significant Black populations, creating multi-state pressure for federal reparations. When multiple states are pursuing reparations and creating economic and political pressure, the federal government would be forced to negotiate comprehensive reparations programs to restore political and economic stability. Black individuals asking the federal government to voluntarily provide reparations while remaining under political control. They have no leverage, no enforcement mechanism, no political power to compel action. So I guess I'm going to wrap this up. Without state-level political control, the current individual approach to reparations will continue to fail because it fundamentally misunderstands the nature of political power and leverage. The same federal government that enslaved us, implemented Jim Crow, and continues to allow systematic discrimination has no incentive to voluntarily provide meaningful reparations while maintaining control over us. Individual reparations demands, no matter how morally justified, lack the political power necessary to compel action. Federal governments can continue making symbolic gestures, forming committees, and commissioning studies while avoiding any meaningful compensation because individuals They lack power to threaten their political interests. The lesson from American history is clear: political entities with territory control, population bases, and governmental authority can achieve reparations, while individuals without political power cannot. Native American tribes achieve reparations through governmental status and political leverage. States have successfully pressured the federal government for political changes and resources through political power and economic power. Black Americans must build the same kind of political power. The McCabe Project offers the most realistic strategy for achieving state level political control necessary to demand and achieve meaningful reparations through concentrated migration and voter mobilization. We can achieve the governmental authority necessary to negotiate as equals rather than begging as subjects. The choice is clear: continue making individual demands that lack political leverage, or build the state level political power necessary to compel federal action. Political power isn't just helpful for achieving reparations, it's absolutely necessary. No oppressed group in American history has received meaningful reparations without first achieving significant political power. The federal government will not provide reparations to powerless individuals, but it will negotiate with a powerful state government that controls resources, territory, and political leverage. Our path to reparations runs through political power, and political power comes through strategic action like the Black State Project that I'm proposing. Thank you for listening to the Black Anarchist Podcast. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. The struggle is real, and the fight for liberation is far from over. Get sovereign or die trying.